first of all, thank you guys for all of your well wishes while I have been down and out. I still have kind of a raspy throat, but I have tested negative, and nevertheless, Stuart and I are staying miles apart from one another, and we're being very safe. But thank you guys so much for your well wishes. Today, I want to talk about a garden design principle that is very close to the last one I talked about. Stuart, let's put a link up to it, where I talked about making an entrance, or the importance of entry when you are designing your garden. Well, this is very much in tandem with that, and it's a concept called framing the view. As you may have discovered if you watch me on my videos, if you've read my book or whatever, I'm probably much more design driven than I am a true plants woman or horticulturalist. And I find that as I started, I'm completely self-taught, so as I discovered some of these design principles, I realized that for me, and I'm sure for you, if you think about it, so many of these things are just intuitive, and all you have to do is bring your intuition to the forefront of your brain, and then deconstruct it with intentionality. So I love this quote, and it perfectly sums up how I feel about this design principle. And it is that it is worth any amount of effort to be able to see your house through the arch of a tree. And that was a quotation from Thomas Church in Gardens Are for People in 1955. Because the arch of a tree very much frames a view, and so beautifully, and it's one of the reasons that I like to sculpt my trees in the way that I do, because it not only creates a ceiling and creates light coming through the canopy of the trees, but it also frames the view into the beyond, or from the inside out. So where Stuart is standing, far away from me, is one of a view that's very important to Hubs and myself. And that is the view that he has from his dad chair just inside the French doors off of the bistro, because that is the long view that goes all the way back into the potager. And it's one of the reasons that I like the fact that the potager is now more open than it used to be, is because in the past it was so obscured by climbing roses and the trellis and the arbor over the entryway gate into the potager. You really couldn't see into that garden room in the distance. And from that perspective where you're standing, Stuart, you can see it pretty well, can you not? And it gives a little hint of what's beyond. So it makes my garden appear so much larger than it would have, because by framing the view, I have opened up what is within the line and the axis of the view, and that is what is at the very end in terms of a focal point. Now, speaking of Stuart, can we all just give Stuart a big round of applause for doing that yesterday? Kudos to you, Stuart, and your sexy voice. Who knew? No, Stuart does have a very sexy voice, except for when he says kind of dorky things that I love, like when he's tickled pink. Or things like that. A number of you asked if Stuart was single. He is single. Anything else you want to reveal about yourself, Stuart, since you're coming out of the shadows a little bit?
It's probably good for the day.
Yeah, it's probably good for the day. He wants to reveal himself slowly. He wants to be a man of mystery. But he did such a great job, and as always, his photography is just stellar. And if in any way my garden in reality looks like it does when Stuart captures it on camera, then I am very flattered, which leads me to my question of the day. If you have been to my garden, and I know many of you have, if you have been to my garden, in actuality, would you compare it with what the real life experience is when you have been here to see it? and what it is when you see it on camera. How does it translate? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it larger? Is it smaller? And just compare and contrast. So if you have seen my garden in real life, then do that for me. If you have not seen it in real life, I hope one day maybe you can. So now back to what our topic of discussion is, and that is framing the view. And framing the view is just as it sounds. It is putting a frame around something special, whether it's a view, whether it's an entrance into a different part of the garden or a different room of the garden, whether it's an entrance where you are framing the view, say up the stairways to your front porch, and you have two symmetrical pots that are there framing the view of what is your front door. And we think of framing the view typically in kind of symmetrical terms, but very much framing the view can also have an asymmetrical quality to it as well, i.e. as in looking at your house through the beautiful arch of a tree. So Stuart, if you don't mind turning around and looking at the window box underneath my kitchen window. Now, Stuart will also show you how my palladium window frames the view into my backyard, but you can also see how the trunk of the maple tree just to the west of it or to the right of it kind of helps frame the view of the window itself. So the window is framing the view out into the garden from inside out, and then from outside in, the trunk of the tree that arches over the window excuse me, is framing the view from the outside in. So it very much helps the house communicate with the garden in that we are taking into account perspectives and views from inside and out and integrating the two. Another way that the view is framed, for example, is, and right now it's kind of a messy view, but Stuart, if you point out from the bistro up the steps into the French doors that go up into where our mom and pop chairs are, those pots, albeit unbalanced and in need of a makeover right now, they frame the view up and into my back French doors. And I think one of the reason, and by the way, I have intentionally left in some of my uglies, because the important thing about framing the view is it's not only what you are intentionally capturing within that frame, whether it's the frame of your camera or the frame that you are creating of a vignette like my back porch. So it's not also what you are intentionally framing within that view, but also the things that you are editing out of that view. So in this perspective of how I have framed the view going up my steps to my back door, you can see that I've framed the view and I have done my best. While I did not edit out the step ladder there, I have done my best to edit out, as I framed the view, the uglies of the utility boxes by trying to make them disappear. So it's not only what you capture within the frame, but what you try to take out and edit out of that frame that hopefully creates some kind of beauty. So another, probably one of the most important framing the views for me is what I hope to capture when you come through my back gate. And this is what I think is so wonderful, because it's very experiential. So when you are framing the view of moving from one area of the garden into another, you are trying to do not only capture the beauty of what is within that frame, but you are also letting people know by framing that view that a change is imminent, that we're moving from one kind of frame and one kind of context and storyline into another kind of context and storyline. So when you come from my front yard and you enter this gate, so Stuart, if you are entering the gate here, I'm going to stay far away from you. And by the way, you guys, Stuart is masked up, and even though I've tested negative, he is being very cautious. When you walk from my front yard and into the backyard, very much what I have decided to frame within that view is a great departure from what is in the front yard. And it tells you that a change is imminent, and that the role of the backyard versus the role of the front yard is very different. So in the backyard, it's more about garden living, whereas the front yard is more about garden gazing. So Stuart, let's go to the back. And you can also frame views within a view. Stuart, I'm going to take a drink of my water here. So one of the things that I tried to do with great intentionality when I pruned these redbud trees was to frame the view from the front to the back. And hence, that is why I have sculpted these branches in this manner. So any of you who have ever, say, pruned up a beautiful Japanese maple to arch over a window or to arch over some kind of garden ornament, that's what you're doing, is basically framing the view with the arch of a branch. And here's an example of that, where the trunk of this tree is framing the view into what is in the back of my garden. So not only is this primarily framing the view, but then I have a secondary frame with the arch of this secondary redbud. And this creates lots of layering within the garden that makes it, in turn, seem larger and more complex because of what is going on. And Stuart, does that make sense? I think so. And if you look at it and you turn around, if you come back this way and you look back, you can then see how the maple frames the view of the vignette that is the back of my house, and then how the secondary framing of the view are the redbud trees above it that then provide another layer of framing. So you're looking in between things and through things as you frame the view. Now, why that's important is that it makes you really cognizant of every area of your garden. So I'm also then aware of it not only as I look out from these windows, but I'm aware of it when I look out from my office windows. So if I am, and this was just so valuable to me when I was working on my book, because most of my book was written in the studio in the back. So Stuart, I'm going to switch places with you, and if you will stand from the office pointing to the garden bench, I then framed this view looking out these windows, so I had a beautiful view right here. Now, albeit this view is a little bit soggy right now, and the hydrangeas are a little bit droopy, but nevertheless, I could come out here and work and look through the window, and without even being outside, I felt as if I were outside, and I had this beautiful vista, this beautiful living painting to look at where I had framed the view of this, taking into account what I was seeing from the inside of that window. And then also elaborating on that a little bit, I'm able to see more of the totality of the view and the complexity of the view because I have opened up the branching of this viburnum. So think again what this view would look like if this were completely solid and nothing but a solid shrub, and you wouldn't be able to see any glimpse of the white behind it, which frames with white on this side what is also in white on the other side. So that's kind of another example. Conversely, as I stand here on this side and I look back at the office from this perspective and look at it this way, the arch of both of these tree branches on these redbud trees serve to frame the view of the French doors. Now, I should have edited out some of this work that still remains to be done in potting and things, but nevertheless, I'm taking into account what I'm capturing within the frame to make it special, and also what I'm editing out. Likewise, probably the best example of framing the view is when you look at something symmetrically. And this also works in symbiotic relationship with the point of entry, because very much entry then really calls for framing the view. So think of what the entrance into the potager would look like if it were just completely open here. There wouldn't even really be an entrance. There would just be another garden space that flowed seamlessly from that area into this area. It wouldn't as dramatically communicate that that was a separate garden room. But by framing the view at this point of entry with things that are harmonious to the garden itself, and speak the same garden style and the same language of the garden, taking into account the scale of what is on this side of the frame and what is on that side of the frame, really communicates that this is a separate garden room, but that it beautifully communicates and speaks to the ongoing conversation of the garden as a whole. So does that make sense, Stuart? So I think about that I am framing the view. So if you'll stand over here, Stuart. I am framing the view at this point of entry, not only into the garden space, but I am also framing the view of the feature of the potager itself, and then on axis to a focal point at the end of that axis, and that's the garden bench, which will lead me to the next garden design principle that we're going to talk about later, and that is focal points. But if you start just deconstructing and analyzing your garden, as you already do, I'm sure, with great intentionality as to how you can more beautifully frame the view, then I think it will help you be that much more satisfied with your garden spaces. And again, it makes no difference what the scale of your garden is. It can be a very tiny space, it can be an apartment balcony, or it can be a grand estate. And these garden design principles are still very, very important, I think. So there you go. There is the garden design principle of framing the view by containing the beautiful and editing out the ugly. There you guys go. I hope you have a great Sunday. Well, if ever there was a season when I'm so glad that I have embraced the concept of the house dress, this year is it. And this episode with COVID really reinforced that. So today I have on one of my house dresses. This is identical to the one that I've showed you before in black. It's just kind of a, not too lightweight, but nevertheless a lightweight and loose linen cotton blend. Most importantly, it's got pockets. I bought this online. In fact, Carrie loved it so much, Stuart, did I tell you I bought her one in olive green because she loved it. And it is just perfect for these kind of things where you want kind of a hybrid between real clothes and pajamas. So it's really good for occasions like this past week when I've been sick. I can wear it and still kind of be presentable as I'm around the house. Also, I love it like if you're at the pool all day and you want to put something on after you get out of the pool that's kind of half half clothing, not quite your pajamas. It's great for that. And it's just so comfortable. And by the way, as a tip, you guys, I bought it a little bit large. I bought it in a medium, so then when you wash it and it shrinks a little bit, it's just the perfect size. And this style, I really like to roll up the sleeves a little bit. So I love this house dress. It comes in other cute colors, and I'm so glad I got it. And I just have on some of my boots from Target because the grass, we got lots of rain this morning. It was just absolutely wonderful and very unexpected. And so things are a little bit soggy outside. And then also, I just have on some of my big hoops I like so much. So there you go. If you held on this long, there is your outfit du jour.